Welcome to Redacted Tonight VIP. I'm Lee Camp. Today I have a big guest. I speak with a longtime member of the UK Parliament and a friend of Julian Assange, George Galloway. He tells me why he thinks Assange is being persecuted and what he believes are the next steps that will be taken by the British and US governments as they continue to torture and imprison a journalist, Julian Assange. In the second half, I get into what the mainstream media doesn't often tell us about the rise of white nationalism in our country. But first, here's my conversation with the former head of the Scottish Labour Party, a writer, a radio show host, George Galloway. Mr. Galloway, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, it's very sorry circumstances, but I'm always happy to be on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. These are dark times. You knew, or know, actually, Julian better than most. You've met with him many times. Do you think he saw this arrest coming, and why do you think they chose to do it now?
I suspect that he felt it was coming for some time, but the reality is when you're under the hammer like he's been, you see a glimmer of hope sometimes where it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible. You were a member of Parliament. Right now, the ball is in the UK's court, pun intended. As to whether they extradite him to the US, what would you say to your former fellow MPs, the ones that have that power right now, if they cared to listen?
Well, in the building behind me, they all cheered. Oh, how they cheered when the Prime Minister, the lame duck, trussed up like a turkey, waiting for the final chop. Theresa May announced that poor Julian had been literally dragged out of the embassy. They cheered to the rafters. They don't have much else to cheer about, and not many people are cheering about them. But it was the most dispiriting display. Of course, there's many a slip twixt cup and lip, and there's every possibility we can move public opinion in this country such that the government declines the invitation of the United States for extradition. But we have an extremely one-sided extradition treaty with the United States, which abandons all need for the US, unlike other countries, to show just cause for that extradition. It's almost automatic, but not quite. We have managed to stop one or two grotesquely unjust, unfair extraditions for a variety of reasons, usually health-related. Well, Julian's in very poor health, as anyone who saw him carried out the other day can testify. And the reality is that the United States cannot give any guarantee that he will not face cruel and unusual punishment, that he will not face torture, maybe not even face the death penalty. And all of these are arguments we're going to be pressing here in Britain to push the government to block the extradition. Julian Assange is a political prisoner, and Britain and the United States went on for decades in support of political prisoners behind the Iron Curtain in the old Soviet Union, and so on. They're absolute hypocrites, of course. They are openly admitting he's a political prisoner. Gone are all the pretenses that it was about sexual offences in Sweden or jumping bail. All of that is abandoned now. It's quite clear. He's got to go to the United States and face the music for the damage he did to the empire in exposing their crimes against humanity.
Yeah, I think the pretenses of all those former charges have been dropped away, and you're absolutely right. I have heard from a couple of people that knew, have met with Julian, and they're saying there may be a slight sliver of light here in that rather than being in limbo, rather than sitting in that embassy without any kind of legal, anything he can do legally, he now has a court battle. He now has a fight that he can actually take on with his lawyers. Is there something to be said for that?
I don't think so, and it was up for Julian to make that decision, I think. He's the one facing 99 years in the modern equivalent of Sing Sing. He's the man that will never be seen or, more importantly, heard from again if he enters the maw of the US justice system and the prison system thereafter. We've seen what happened to Chelsea Manning. She's now back behind bars out of principle, refusing to testify against Julian Assange. It's very dark times, dark days, as you said right at the beginning, with all these liberal donkeys hee-hawing about Julian Assange, when they themselves are the people in the beginning who benefited from the work that WikiLeaks did in exposing war crimes, exposing the crimes against humanity, and who themselves might one day find themselves in exactly the same position that Julian Assange finds himself in now.
I'd like for you to talk a little more about that, about these, many of them are liberals, many of them are so-called left-wing in the media, and the silence on standing up for a fellow publisher, a fellow journalist is just deafening. Talk a little about that.
I'd be grateful for silence on their part. Over here, it's the opposite of silence. It's braying, it's hee-hawing, it's laughing and ridiculing and humiliating, making fun of his appearance after 7 years locked up in a room, never seeing the sun. I don't know if I can say the word, it's urinating on a fellow publisher, on a fellow journalist, on a fellow truth teller. At least that's how they would have you believe they regard themselves. It is the most repugnant, disgusting spectacle I have ever seen. People who earn their living publishing and writing what they claim to be the truth and truths that they have uncovered, cheering at a man being carried away into the dungeons of the United States.
Yeah, and many of them, as you rightly mentioned earlier, benefited from his work. They have published articles based on what WikiLeaks has reported. The Guardian in the earlier days worked with him to put out those articles, and now all of a sudden they've turned and they're calling him a criminal. It's totally repugnant.
Well, the Guardian, the New York Times, the German papers, the Italian papers, all of them were happy to publish the truths that WikiLeaks incontrovertibly, don't forget, WikiLeaks, the only publisher in the world that has never had to correct a single thing that they have ever published. No other journal can say that. So these truths that they were once so happy to splash on their front pages, they're now content to see the man who gave them that story go to prison for the rest of his natural. No words, no time is available for me to adumbrate the list of criminals in this picture, from the Australian state which abandoned its own citizen, from the British state that spent £20 million keeping Julian in a room in the Ecuador embassy, and the British courts that are falling over themselves to ship him off to the United States, to the so-called Democrats in the United States that were happy to use Julian's information against George W. Bush, but who now are seeking to dance on his graves. As I say, no words, no time to fully list the number of villains in this piece. The one person who's not a villain is Julian Assange.
Yeah, speaking of villains, WikiLeaks revealed countless war crimes over the past decade, many of them thanks to Chelsea Manning, and now the only people to be locked up, to be locked away for these horrific, unspeakable acts are Manning and Assange, just like the only person to ever be locked up for America's illegal torture program is the guy who revealed it, John Kiriakou. What does this say about the American, and in many regards the British as well, criminal justice system?
It says that George Orwell's 1984 turned out to be a manual, not a novel, not a piece of fiction. George Orwell in 1984 couldn't have made up what we have here. Everybody that was involved in making the decisions to plunge the world into what has turned into a never-ending war throughout the world are now lauded, praised, showered with flowers, given high-paid speaking engagements, television and radio appearances every single day. And those who cried out against it are the people who are prosecuted, put behind bars, lose their jobs. John Kiriakou, the only man to go to prison for the torture in Guantanamo Bay. The only person to lose his job for opposing the Iraq war in the building behind me now is me.
Yeah.
I'm the only person that lost my job for standing up against the crime. Tony Blair cannot handle the amount of media engagements that he's got, and he's made £100 million, $150 million in the years since the Iraq war. You know, black is white, good is evil, truth is lies. You really could not make up, even Orwell could not make up the situation we now find ourselves in.
I want to shift back to the legal side for one more minute. The day before Assange was arrested, his legal representatives did a press conference, an hour-long press conference, where they revealed that someone was trying to extort them, that everything they had done in the embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy, had been videotaped, and their private documents had been copied, and everything Assange had done, every doctor visit, everything had been spied on, and now this person wanted €3 million in order to not reveal private doctor visits and lawyer visits to the press. You know, just a horrific situation. But that's not the only way that his legal team has been hounded and pressured every step of the way to just try and stop him from getting any kind of fair treatment in the courts. I was wondering if you could talk a little more about that.
Yes, every principle of lawyer-client privilege has been violated, and violated, one must assume, in the interests of the United States justice system. And if it was for the British justice system, that will have to be fought out in the court battles to come over the extradition. Every principle of innocence before being proved guilty has been violated. The trumped-up charges which sent him in to the embassy in the first place, and which have now melted into nothing. They have been ready to stop at nothing, and for more than a decade, to destroy this man. And people watching this have to ask themselves, what was it about Julian Assange, about WikiLeaks, that made them worthy of this kind of juggernaut? And the answer is not difficult to see. When they say he was weaponizing information, if information is true, it cannot be weaponized. The truth is the truth. And if he exposed the truth, we should be thanking him for it. He should be receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, not a one-way ticket to the United States justice system. It is an outrage, beyond outrage.
Yeah,
and as is probably evident in my speaking to you, I can hardly contain my anger and indignation about it.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, he has revealed the truth, and nothing WikiLeaks has ever put out has ever been taken back or proven false. Compare that record to CNN or NBC or BBC or any of them. It's an amazing record. In this final minute, I was wondering if you could address all the people, the revolting people I hear or see online who seem to act like they stand up for left-wing politics, or they care for truth, and they care for having an accountable government, and they don't want endless war, and yet they say, fuck Assange because he tweeted things I didn't like. He, said something positive about so-and-so, and so he said this thing I don't like, so therefore don't care for him.
Yeah, their principle is not so much Voltaire's, I don't like what you say, but I'll die for your right to say it. They will die for your right to agree with them.
Right.
And when you don't agree with them, your rights are to be trampled on and crushed, as well as your mind and your body too, if necessary. It is, I'm afraid to say, I know American viewers don't like me using the word in this way, never trust liberals. Small L liberals are just the lipstick on the pig of the power that is in power on your side of the Atlantic and on mine. And that lipstick can be wiped away, will be wiped away whenever is necessary.
If there's a time to stand up and be heard, it's right now. Thank you so much, George Galloway, for standing up for Julian Assange. We have to go to a quick break, but we are being censored online. The best way to keep up with our content is to text the word redacted to 444-999. It's free and quick, and that will get you signed up to our free newsletter. If you're outside the U.S., you can also sign up at redactedtour.com. I'll be right back with a lot more. Welcome back to Redacted Tonight VIP. I'm Lee Camp. Let's talk about the growing white nationalist movement here at home. To me, white supremacists, they're kind of like wild horses. I know they're around somewhere, like I know they exist, but I've never met one up close. So I start to question, are they really out there in the numbers that people say they are? But unlike a wild horse, I'm fairly certain I have been around a white supremacist and just didn't realize it because he wasn't acting all white supremacy at that moment. You know, sometimes a white supremacist is just like a guy with overactive BO buying Skittles at the 7-Eleven. You don't really know. Also, it depends on how we define up close. Like, I was once 10 feet from a white supremacist. He was driving a car through a crowd of people in Charlottesville, Virginia, trying to kill as many of us as he could. He only succeeded in killing one. So, come to think of it, 10 feet is about as close as I'd like to be to a white supremacist. That's about my max. While white nationalists and right-wing extremists did get credit, quote unquote, for the terrorism in Charlottesville, our mainstream media often lets them off the hook in a lot of other ways. The media will give you wall-to-wall coverage of countless mass shootings in America, right? They will cover it. But they don't often let you know that all of the extremist killings in the U.S. in 2018 had links to right-wing extremism. That's right, all of them. Do you know how much all is? It's a lot. It's like most of them, or even worse. It's like all of them. Every single mass shooting last year was connected to right-wing extremism. There were at least 50 extremist-related killings in 2018, according to the report, making it the fourth deadliest year on record for domestic extremist-related killings since 1970. These killings are getting more prevalent and more deadly, and they're all connected to right-wing extremists. So every time someone tries to tell you about eco-terrorists or the maniac socialists are coming to get us or how Antifa is just so dangerous, just remember that the left are not the ones walking into schools and bars and stuff and just massacring people. That is a distinctly right-wing hobby. And to get more specific, of those right-wing extremist killers, white supremacists were responsible for the great majority of the killings. So this is an entirely right-wing extremist issue and mainly white supremacists. But it gets worse. The Intercept recently reported on terrorism's double standard. Violent far-right extremists are rarely prosecuted as terrorists. An Intercept analysis found that the Justice Department has routinely declined to bring terrorism charges against right-wing extremists, even when their alleged crimes meet the legal definition of domestic terrorism. Ideologically motivated acts that are harmful to human life and intended to intimidate civilians, influence policy, or change government conduct. So the entirety of extremist killers last year were right-wing. And yet right-wing extremist killers are rarely prosecuted as terrorists. In fact, the Charlottesville white supremacist who drove through scores of people, killing one and maiming dozens of us, he was not charged for terrorism. He was charged with other things. But you know, what could better fit the definition of terrorism than driving your car through people, trying to kill them, and trying to strike terror in the hearts of as many as possible because you want white supremacy and they don't want to let you have it. and also you're not very bright. He, of course, was prosecuted and was locked away for a long time for other charges than terrorism. But our justice system is innately racist and angled toward helping out white right-wing extremists. Not just in the courts, but there's a great amount of white supremacy in U.S. police forces as well, which was also seen at the Charlottesville protests, and which was arguably what allowed the murder to happen. The cops were told to stand down and allow white supremacists to engage in violence, and they did just that. They stood by and watched. And after the car hit and killed someone, they took forever to show up, even though we knew they were nearby. The cops were nearby, but they took like 20 minutes, half hour to get to the scene that they were 3 blocks away from. It was real tough to find. You know, in case the screams and the fire trucks didn't alert them to where it was happening, it took them a while to really suss out where it happened. The question of how much of our law enforcement has been infiltrated by white supremacists is a good one. It is. And it's tough to know. Back in 2006, even the FBI put out an assessment saying that white supremacist infiltration of law enforcement was a serious concern. And it makes sense that white nationalists would have no trouble blending into the police because the police are already kind of set up to be like that. You know, they're already harsher on communities of color. They're already promoting white police officers quicker and easier. And if they promote non-white officers, it's usually because those non-white officers proved that they could be as harsh on black communities as the white cops were being. So they were like, wow, even though you're a black guy, you did a great job of beating up those other black guys. Congrats, you're promoted. Well done, impressive. My point is, if a white supremacist shows up in certain police departments in this country, they're kind of meeting them halfway, aren't they? It doesn't really take much infiltration, much disguise. It's like saying that Rice Krispies has been infiltrated by the off-brand crispy rice. They were already nearly the same thing, right? You know, one has Snap, Crackle, and Pop, and the other one had Bip, Bang, Pow, or whatever. If Pow infiltrates Snap, Crackle, and Pop, I mean, it's not much of a stretch. He didn't have to, like, rearrange the whole system to his liking. He already looked and acted a lot like them. He was already a miniature dude dressed like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and selling knockoff crispy rice. Snap and Crackle probably said to Pow, "You kind of seem a lot like us. Come on in." You get the analogy? I think it works. But it doesn't stop with just the police, right? There are also proven examples of white supremacists or nationalists infiltrating the military as well. It's an actual strategy that neo-Nazi groups have talked about in their membership, in their pamphlets, or whatever the fuck they hand out. They tell members, join the military, learn how to kill people, and then when you come out, you can go back to being a civilian Nazi fuckhead. In a number of cases, white supremacists have served in the military and then turned to deadly violence afterwards. Examples include Wade Page, who opened fire at a Sikh temple in Wisconsin in 2012, and Timothy McVeigh, who bombed a federal building in Oklahoma City in 1995. More recently, a half dozen current and former service members were linked in 2017 to the Adam Waffa Division, a violent white supremacist group. The Military Times reported on a poll, they did that reporting on a poll given to active duty military that found white nationalism remains a problem for the military. 22% of soldiers polled said they had seen signs of white nationalism in their ranks. And that's self-reporting, so I'm sure it's even higher than that, because I'm sure a lot of these soldiers are like, "No, I didn't see any white nationalism. I don't know what you mean." Hell, for the ones who actually are white nationalists, they're clearly not going to report that yeah, it's me. There you go. Of course, that article, they also went to an effort, they kind of stumbled over themselves to make very clear that the military tries to stop white nationalism in the ranks. The results from the survey suggest ongoing problems with infiltration of the military by extremist groups, even as military leaders have reminded service members that white nationalist views are opposed to military values. They reminded them. Thank goodness. They reminded. Hey, fellas, don't forget to brush your teeth, wash your socks, and don't be white nationalists, all right? Just put the white supremacy aside, all right? Just a little memory. Just there's a little post-it for you. Don't forget. But here's what they're missing in that article, in their analysis. White nationalist views are military values. They are. Our government and military are far more likely to bomb, destroy, and attack nations that are not white and European. Even the times we have attacked white countries, it was like with reluctance. I mean, in World War II, for years before we entered World War II, we were like, this Hitler guy ain't so bad. You know, let's give him some time. I'm sure he'll mellow out after he gets France. He'll chill out. I mean, once he gets some of those chocolate croissants in him, I'm sure he'll mellow. Oh, I mean, you sit there, a nice sunny day, you have a chocolate croissant, cigarette, he'll be fine. It wasn't until we were bombed that we finally got our ass in gear. Meanwhile, a non-white country like Libya looks at us sideways, and we're like, bomb him, kill him. He gave me a scowl. Did you see that? Definite scowl. Bomb the shit out of him. They're scowling over there. He scowled. Our empire's military very clearly holds racist views, and that is nothing new. You go around the world killing innocent people and calling it justified military targets, then you inevitably are going to create beliefs in the soldiers that it's okay to kill people who aren't like them. Like, that's in the training, basically. Fascism and white nationalism and other horrific ideals are growing in this country. They're getting worse. They're getting larger. They're getting more violent. And while Trump may be the most clearly racist figure to lead our nation in a while, our racist foreign policy is not new. Trump has just accidentally exposed it. He's accidentally exposed our system, our ruling elite, for being the racist they are. Trump's former top guy, Steve Bannon, said in a speech, a public speech, that being called a racist is a badge of honor. And the corporate-owned Democrats allow this shit to continue. They allow it because the truth is this racist system has put them into office in the first place. Why would they want to stand against it? It's what got them there. So it's up to the rest of us to speak out, to defend communities of color, to fight back against hate and fascism and the belief by so many that other people don't have the right to exist. It's up to us. That's all the time we have, but I have live stand-up comedy events coming up in Chicago, Detroit, New York City, Minneapolis, Montreal, and Washington, D.C. Tickets are at redactedtour.com. You can also vote for your city to be added at redactedtour.com. And you can watch my latest stand-up comedy special at leecampcomedyspecial.com. Until next time, good night, and keep fighting.